Some say the West was not won, it was taken. And before the settlers, before the railroads, before the buffalo were driven to the edge of existence, this land belonged to the people. Among them was a warrior, a leader, a man whose name carried the weight of war and the fire of resistance. Gall, war chief of the Hunkpapa Lakota. He stood with Sitting Bull, fought at the Little Bighorn, and watched the world he knew fade beneath the tide of history. This is his story, as told by our narrator, Stabs Twice. It is a tale of courage, survival, and the fight for a way of life that would not be forgotten. Welcome to the Chronicles of the Old West, Season 1, Episode 1, Gall.
Hear me, grandchildren, for I will speak of a time long past when the world was young and the people walked in the sacred way. This is the story of a warrior, but to know him, we must first see the path he walked as a child, the trials that shaped his heart, and the dreams that guided his steps. What I tell you is not written, for our people do not hold their stories in the white man's way. Since the first dawn, our truth has been carried upon the breath of our elders, spoken beneath the great sky, passed from the old to the young, so that the people may never forget. This is how it has always been, and how it should always be. For in these words live the spirit of our ancestors, the wisdom of the land, and the story of who we are. This story begins in the lands the white men, the Wasichu, call the Dakota Badlands. But to us, they were the heart of the world, where the bones of the earth spoke of ancient times. It was there, among those strange formations, that the Hunkpapa band of the Lakota had come together with the Northern Cheyenne, a people we called friends in those days. A good feeling was between us, and our young men, their blood hot with the desire to prove their manhood, sought ways to test themselves. The wrestling match was one of these ways. The people had formed a circle as the drums beat like the heart of Mother Earth, a rhythm that called to the warriors. Young men, stripped to their breechcloths, their bodies painted for the contest, stepped into that circle. They came from both the Hunkpapa and the Cheyenne, each eager to show their strength. The rules of match were sacred. No striking with the hand, no kicking with the foot, no pulling of the hair, only the raw strength of the grapple. The clash of body against body, will against will. To be thrown down, to feel the cold hand of the earth against your back, was to bear the mark of defeat. Among those who stepped into the circle that day was a Cheyenne, and not just any youth, but one whose spirit burned as bright as the stars. He was Roman Nose, a name that would one day bring fear to the Wasichu, a warrior whose deeds would be sung long after his passing. But on that day, he was young, his pride still untested, his place in the world yet to be won. And before him, a Hunkpapa youth, quiet and well-built, his power not in boastful words, but in the steady fire of his gaze. The people did not know it at that time, but his name would also be sung among the great ones. They met in the center, these two, like the storm winds that battle over the plains. Their hands locked onto each other, their muscles tensed, and then the struggle began. They moved like young elk in the autumn rut, their heads lowered, their feet digging into the earth, their sinews straining like the bowstring drawn to its limit. They twisted and surged, their breath coming hard, sweat streaking their painted bodies. They lifted one another, their feet leaving the ground, only to land again. The dust rose around them, and the only sound was the grunts of effort and the pounding of the drums. It was a long struggle. Neither would yield. It was not just their bodies that were tested, but their wills, their very spirits. It was a contest that reached into the heart of what it means to be a warrior. As the sun began to dip low, a change came. Perhaps it was a moment of weakness, a slight misstep, or perhaps it was the greater power of the Hunk Papa youth that prevailed. With a mighty surge, he threw Roman Nose to the earth. He held him there, his hand firm upon his opponent's chest, until all knew that the contest was finished. A great cry went up from the Hunk Papa. Pride swelled in their hearts. Their warrior had triumphed. He had shown his strength, his skill, his heart. But he did not smile, nor did he boast, for he knew that true honor does not shout. It stands silent and unshaken. The Cheyenne, though defeated, showed a grace that reflected the unbreakable spirit of the young man. There was no anger, no bitterness, only the respect that warriors have for one another. Roman Nose's mother, a woman of dignity, came forward. She honored the Hunk Papa youth, draping a beautiful buffalo robe, a thing of great value, over his shoulders. In return, the Hunk Papa's mother, whom they called Walks with Many Names, stepped forward as well. She covered Roman Nose with a fine blanket, a gesture of respect and honor. In that moment, the people knew that what they saw was more than just a test of young warriors. It was the unfolding of destinies. They saw the strength and spirit of young men who were destined to become leaders, warriors who would one day stand against the tide. Roman Nose would rise to lead his people into battle against the Wasatch. His name carried like a war cry across the plains. And the other, he would become a storm upon the land, a war chief whose defiance would shake the world. That young Hunk Papa, the one who prevailed in the circle that day, was Peedsy. The Wasatch know him as Gall. It is said that Gall was born when the winds of autumn whispered through the tall grass, when the rivers grew quiet beneath the gaze of the changing sky. The Wasatch speak of years and numbers, but our people did not mark time as they do. Some say he was born in the year they call 1840, when the first frost touched the earth. Others say it was later, but what does it matter? He was born when he was meant to be born, in the time the spirits had chosen. His first cries rose up among the hills along the Moreau River, where the land was soft with trees and the earth held its people close. This was the land of the Hunk Papa, a band of the Lakota who moved like the wind, following the buffalo, living in rhythm with the earth. Their numbers were not great, but their strength was like the roots of the old tree, deep and unyielding. If it was true that Gall was born in the autumn, then his first moons were spent beneath the shelter of buffalo robes, wrapped in the warmth of his mother's love. Outside, the winter winds would have been howling across the plains, but inside his family's lodge, he was safe. His mother, Walks with Many Names, would have held him close, whispering to him the old songs, telling him of the world he had entered. From the moment he could walk, the earth would become his teacher. The rivers, the hills, the sky, they would speak to him as they spoke to all Lakota children. A bow and arrow would be placed in his hand while he was still small, and he would learn to pull the string with a steady grip. He would run with the other boys, racing through the tall grass, his feet learning the feel of the land, his heart growing strong with the promise of the warrior's path. His father, Akiskehan, making many sisters, they called him, was a man of honor. He, and Walks with Many Names, gave him his first name, Matohinshta, bare shedding his hair, a name of warmth and love. But it was his mother who gave him the name that would stay with him through the years. One day, after a buffalo was slain, she saw her son take up the gallbladder and eat it. She laughed, and in her laughter, she gave him his name, Peetsy, Gall. And so it was. A name given in a moment, but one that would be known across the plains in the years to come. The people say that Gall was not raised by his parents alone. Among the Lakota, the child belongs to the people, and the people belong to the child. His uncles, his aunts, his grandparents, all of them were his teachers. This was the way of the Lakota, the great family that stretched beyond blood, bound together by something deeper. And in those years, fate placed him at the side of another boy, a boy who would one day lead the people in their greatest struggle. His name was Tatanka Iyotake. The Wasatchu call him Sitting Bull. He played a crucial role in Gall's life, but we will get to that in time. There are some that say Gall's parents were taken from him when he was still small, that his people were scattered in the face of an enemy's attack. Others say his mother survived and raised him. There are many stories, and perhaps all of them are true in their own way. What is certain is that Gall grew strong, not in the shadow of weakness, but in the embrace of a people who knew that a boy must be shaped like the arrow, straight, swift, and unbreakable. The first sign of what he would become came when he was still small. It was during a buffalo hunt, when the people were moving through the Powder River country. His mother had tied him to a sled, a sturdy dog pulling him along as they traveled. Then, suddenly, a jackrabbit burst from the grass. The dog, filled with the spirit of the chase, took off running. The sled lurched, its poles rattling, its leather ties straining. Any other child would have wailed, would have reached for his mother's hand. But not Gall. He did not fear. With one hand, he seized the dog's tail, his fingers curling like talons around the fur. With the other, he gripped the pole of the sled, his small body riding the storm like a warrior upon a charging war horse. The people watched, their hearts pounding, as the chase stretched across the land. When at last the rabbit fell, caught in the jaws of the dog, his mother rushed forward, reaching for her son. But the boy did not look at her. His eyes were on the dog, his voice ringing out with joy. "Mother, my dog is brave. He got the rabbit." The old men, the warriors, nodded among themselves. One of them spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of knowing. "These things do not happen by accident," he said. "This boy will one day stand before the people, and they will know his name." Even as a child, Gall did not shrink from hardship. The boys of the camp trained for war through games that tested their endurance, their skill, and their hearts. One winter, when the snow lay heavy upon the earth and the wind howled like a hungry spirit, the young ones of the camp waged their own battle, not with a bow, not with a lance, but with snow packed hard as stones. They clashed, their cries ringing across the frozen land. It was a fierce struggle, wild as any raid upon an enemy's camp. But the odds turned against Gall. One by one, his warriors fell, driven back by the storm of ice and laughter, until he stood alone, the last defender against 11 foes. They saw him and jeered, certain of their triumph. Then, from the very place where Gall had taken cover, a great gray wolf rose from the snow, its breath curling like smoke in the bitter air. The boys fell silent, their hearts pounding like war drums. Had Gall called this spirit? Had he become it? They did not know, but fear seized them, and in that moment, Gall moved. Like the wind before the storm, he charged, untouched by the hail of snowballs, and crossed the safety line. His people erupted in victory, their cries echoing into the vast winter sky. Even the elders, wrapped in their robes, only nodded, their faces unreadable. Everyone noticed there's something different about this young warrior. As I mentioned earlier, there was one among the people who saw what Gall would become, Sitting Bull. He was 9 winters older, already a leader, already a warrior. He took notice of Gall, for he saw in him the fire of one who held immense bravery and courage. Sitting Bull himself had walked the warrior's path from a young age. At 14, he struck his first enemy in battle, knocking him from his horse with his tomahawk. For this, the people honored him. His father gave him a new name. The boy who had been called Jumping Badger became Sitting Bull. Some called him Slow because he was patient, because he waited and had a calculating nature about him. But those who knew him understood. He was like the storm that builds on the horizon, silent until the moment it breaks. Gall watched, and Gall learned. He saw how a warrior earned his name, how he won the respect of the people. These lessons would stay with him, guiding his hand in the battles to come. The Lakota were strong, but they had enemies: the Crows, the Assiniboines, the Flatheads, the Arikaras. All of them laid claim to land the Lakota needed to survive. And so, the young men of the people rode against them, fighting for honor, for horses, for the right to hunt where the buffalo roamed. When Gall was 11 winters old, the Wasatchu came with their paper and their lies. They gathered the tribes at Fort Laramie, speaking of peace, marking lines upon the earth as if they could claim the land with words. But the Lakota are not a people who bow to lines drawn by others. The land belonged to those strong enough to keep it. And so, the wars did not end. Gall grew into his strength, and soon his name was carried on the wind. He stole horses from the enemy, struck them in battle, counted many coups. The people whispered of his deeds, and Sitting Bull watched with pride. But not all who grew beside Gall walked the same path. Among the hunk papas was a boy called Bloody Knife, born of two worlds, but truly belonging to neither. His father was Lakota, his mother, Arikara, an enemy people long at odds with the Lakota. This blood marked him, set him apart, and for that, the other boys of the camp did not let him forget. Though he was strong, though he fought hard to prove himself, the stain of his mother's people clung to him like the scent of an enemy's campfire. He was not one of them. And among those who reminded him most was Gall, the fiercest of them all. When the boys tested their strength, Gall threw him down harder. When they raced, Gall ran swifter. When they fought with fists and sticks, it was Gall who left him, bruised and breathless in the dust. At first, Bloody Knife resisted, meeting Gall's strength with his own. But the camp was not kind. The laughter of the others rang in his ears, the whispers of his mixed blood following him wherever he went. No matter how many times he stood, he was struck down again. Gall made sure of it, not out of hatred, but because it was the way of things. The weak fell beneath the strong, the unworthy did not rise. Yet, in the fire of humiliation, something in Bloody Knife hardened. He learned to bear his pain in silence. He swallowed his shame, turning it into something colder, sharper. And though the hunk papas never accepted him, he never forgot. Not the bruises, not the laughter, and never Gall. Hatred does not die when the sun sets. It grows in the darkness. And when Bloody Knife left the hunk papas to live among his mother's people, he did not forget the boy who had humiliated him. Years later, when the Lakota would ride against the Wasichu, when the thunder of hooves would shake the earth, Bloody Knife would return, but not as a Lakota. He would return as an enemy. But I will tell you about that when the time is right. I have heard it said that when a warrior walks his path, the wind and the stars watch him, measuring his steps. So it was with Gall. The people say that as he grew, his shadow stretched long beside that of Sitting Bull, and the old ones nodded, for they knew a great leader rises beside another. Though Sitting Bull was older, it was Gall who would walk in step with him, strong like a bull buffalo that does not yield. In those days, to be a man among the Lakota was not merely to live, but to earn one's place through deeds, not words. A warrior proved himself not by taking life, but by facing danger with a fearless heart. The greatest mark of courage was to count coup, to ride close, to reach out, and to touch an enemy without bringing him harm. The warrior who counted coup was praised above all, for he had proven his courage before his people and his enemies alike, and because of that, the people placed a white feather in his hair and sang his name. Gall's first coup is not remembered in the same way, but the warriors say he must have had many, for later, when the Long Knives feared him, they called him the Fighting Cock of the Sioux. One bull, who was Sitting Bull's nephew, once said that Gall had taken at least 20 coups, but the old ones know that was only part of the story. When the Lakota fought the Long Knives, the ways of war changed. The soldiers did not fight, as the Lakota did. They stood in tight ranks, moving like a river, with no space between the drops of water. There were fewer chances for a man to strike his enemy with his own hand, yet still, Gall made his name known. Like Sitting Bull before him, Gall fought the Crows and the Assiniboines. He rode into battle with a hunger that could not be filled, and when the warriors saw him, they knew he was a man to follow. He was not a cautious man. He did not shrink from the fight, and the scars upon his body told the story of a warrior who had faced death many times. He wore the red feather that marked a man wounded in battle, though some say he should have worn many. Yet a warrior is more than a man who fights. Among the Lakota, those who led the people were chosen for their wisdom, not only for the strength in their hands. The great council was made of those who had lived many winters, men who had been hunters, warriors, and speakers of good words. Some were large in their later years, with bellies that showed they no longer ran with the buffalo, but their minds were sharp like the point of a lance. Each tribe had its Aitankan, the one who carried the burden of leadership, and its 4 shirt-wearers, men of great honor, who carried the people's trust. These were chosen for their bravery, their honor, their wisdom. The first of these were 4 horns, red horn, loud-voiced hawk, and running antelope. Of them all, 4 horns, the uncle of Sitting Bull, was the strongest of heart. Gall was still a boy when the Hunk Papa first chose their 4, but in time, he too would take his place among those who led. The Lakota do not choose leaders as the Wasichu do. A man does not command his people as a soldier commands an army. He must walk the road before them, and if they believe in him, they follow. Sitting Bull walked that road first, and Gall walked it beside him. The circle of life was sacred, and the medicine men knew the ways of the world that could not be seen with the eyes. The sacred hoop, the path of all things, guided the people. The 4 directions opened like doors, black from the west, red from the north, yellow from the east, and white from the south. The medicine men, who spoke to Wakang Tanka, guided the warriors and the chiefs, reminding them that even in war, the spirit was the greatest weapon. And so, in time, Sitting Bull was made war chief of the Hunk Papas. The people had seen his strength, his wisdom, and they knew he would lead them well. But he did not stand alone. Beside him was Gall. Among the Lakota, a warrior was not only a man with a lance. He was a member of the Akichita, the warrior societies that bound the strongest together. Gall walked among these men, first in the Strong Heart Society, where Sitting Bull himself had carried the sacred sash, the rope that a warrior drove into the ground, vowing never to retreat. Later, he stood among the Midnight Strong Hearts, where only the most honored sat, sharing stories beneath the stars. Some say he walked among the Silent Eaters as well, the society of those who spoke little but gave much to the people. It was in these places that warriors tested one another, and only the greatest remained. For many winters, Gall stood beside Sitting Bull as a brother in battle, as a voice in council, as one whom the people trusted. They were alike, yet they were not the same. Gall was strong, his arms thick like the trunks of young trees, his body broad as a bison's back. Though he was not the tallest among men, when he sat upon his horse, he was as great as any. He painted his body red, as did Sitting Bull. But where one was like the earth, steady and unmoving, the other was like the wildfire that runs with the wind. In those days, they called Gall by other names. Walks in red clothing, Red Walker. It was said that his name carried the color of war, for he had seen many battles, and the blood of his enemies had darkened the grass where he stood. Gall's heart was quick to rise, his voice like thunder rolling across the sky, while Sitting Bull spoke as the wind moves through the trees, slow and measured. Gall looked at the ways of the Wasatchu and sought to use them as a man might use a sharp stone, while Sitting Bull turned away and walked the path of the old ones. But when the people rode to war, they followed them both, for each carried power, and the Wasatchu learned to fear their names. The wind carried those names far, whispering them through the lodges of the soldiers, speaking them in the tongues of those who watched from afar. And in the days to come, many would look upon Gall and know that he was a man not easily defeated. There is no trail that does not bend, no river that does not one day meet another. Gall's path was different from Sitting Bull's in the end, but in the days of their greatest battles, they stood together. The people still tell the stories of those days, and when the fire burns low, the old men remember. They say that in battle, Gall's war cry could shake the earth, and when his horse ran, it was like rolling thunder. A warrior's time does not last forever, but if his deeds are mighty and his honors great, his name does. The Lakota still speak of Gall, and as long as they do, his courage flows like the river, carried in the hearts of those who remember.
And that wraps up this episode of Chronicles of the Old West. This podcast is a dramatized retelling based on real historical events, people, and places. While our narrator, Stabs Twice, is a fictional character, every effort has been made to remain true to the spirit and facts of history. Certain liberties have been taken with pacing and dramatic structure for storytelling purposes. The core events, figures, and settings are drawn from documented accounts and research. Next time on Chronicles of the Old West, the winds of war gather on the plains. As the Lakota face mounting pressure from the advancing U.S. Army, Gall emerges as a resolute protector of his people, his name becoming a symbol of resistance. But as his legend spreads, so too does the shadow of an old enemy waiting in the dark. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Your feedback helps us bring more stories to life. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Chronicles of the Old West.